This is Build a Big Podcast. I'm David Hooper, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. It's the marketing podcast for podcasters. You haven't heard from me for a couple of weeks, and the reason is I'm working on another podcasting project, something I would love for you to be part of. This episode is a casting call for that project. I'm looking for some very specific stories. I'm going to list what I'm looking for, and if this is you, this is how to get in touch with me. I want you to go to bigpodcast.com/contact. bigpodcast.com/contact. There's a form you will fill out and tell me, David, I've got this kind of story. You might want to tell me a little bit about it. I will get you a link to upload your recording to me because these need to be in audio. This is for an audio project. I would love for you to be part of it, and I would love to plug your podcast while doing so. So here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for your worst interview when things went wrong, when you thought everything was going to be just fine, and then bam, something came out of left field. It could have been a technical problem. It could have been a guest standing you up, somebody that you really wanted to interview. Your worst podcast experience. Keep it light. I'm not trying to make anybody depressed, but I am trying to show that there are ups and downs of podcasting. So the worst thing that could have happened when something went horribly wrong, I'm looking for those kind of stories. I'm looking for your origin story, how you got into podcasting. Is it something weird like me? Just happened to be in a room working on a radio show. We could do a podcast. And they're like, hey, what's a podcast? And I didn't know. But I'd seen Dave Jackson do it. So I said, we're going to figure this out. Something like that. If you've got an origin story that's interesting, I want to hear it. Speaking of Dave Jackson, he loves to do these stories he calls because of my podcast, something that happened to you because of your podcast. Maybe you got tickets to an event. They considered you media. You didn't consider yourself media before that. Those are the kind of things that I want to know. The secondary payoff of podcasting, I'm looking for marketing stories, how you're using podcasting to market yourself. For example, I know a lot of musicians, they can't be on the road right now because of COVID-19. They've turned to podcasting to market themselves. So if you're a live performer, a speaker, a comic, and you're using podcasting right now to stay in front of the audience that you can't get to live, I want to know about that. But any marketing stories, I'm looking for those. I'm looking for diversity in podcasting stories. So if you are part of a group that you feel is underrepresented in media, I want to hear from you. And if you know somebody who is part of a group that is underrepresented in media, I want to hear from you. It doesn't have to be sexual orientation, race, any kind of gender issue. Maybe it's something like you're vegan, or maybe it's something like you're a Jewish person who believes in Jesus. I'm looking for diversity stories, and they can be anything. I'm not going to judge you on it. If you feel like you're a diversity type of podcast, send me your story because I think podcasting has a place for everybody. That's what I'm trying to show on this. And finally, I want to hear your guesting stories. When you have been a guest on other people's podcasts, if you're using other people's podcasts to leverage their audiences to market yourself or just to spread your message. If you've got a guesting story, I want to hear from you. I'm going to give you the URL again. I'm going to review all of these again. And I want you to reach out and let me know which one of these that you fit into. The URL to contact me, it's bigpodcast.com/contact. Easy to remember. bigpodcast.com/contact. And again, here's what I'm looking for. Your worst podcast experience, your worst interview, something when things went horribly wrong. I'm looking for origin stories. How did you get started podcasting? Did you see somebody else doing it and were you inspired by them? Or did you happen upon it in an interesting and weird way? A back door maybe, a side door. Let me know about it. Because of my podcast, you've heard Dave Jackson talk about these. I want to get your version of that. Something that happened because of your podcast, a secondary payoff. I want to know how you've been marketing yourself or your message, spreading your message via your podcast. So send me marketing and spreading of message stories. I want to know if you are a diverse person, a member of a group that is unrepresented or underrepresented in traditional media, and how you're using podcasting to reach out to more people from that group, and possibly to combine it with spreading a message, letting people know that your group exists and you've got something to say. Any kind of diversity story, I want to hear that. And finally, guesting. If you're leveraging podcasting and the podcast of other people to spread your message, but you don't have a podcast, or your specific Or maybe you do have a podcast, but you are using this marketing technique to spread the message, maybe just to bring them over to your podcast. I want to hear those. Your worst interview, your origin story because of my podcast, marketing, diversity stories, and guesting stories, bigpodcast.com/contact. That is how to get in touch with me. Thank you so much. If you want to keep updated on this project while you're at bigpodcast.com, go to this URL, bigpodcast.com/subscribe, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. You will find all the podcasts that I do. Well, not all of them, a lot of them, including this one, Build a Big Podcast. You can subscribe for free. You'll get every episode downloaded to your podcatcher device. If you're on iPhone, I got a button for you. Android, got a button for you. If you want an RSS feed, I've got a button for you. That's at bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Thank you so much for listening to Build a Big Podcast. Reach out to me. I'm going to find a place for your story. I want to show the diversity of podcasting and how different people are using it. So if you've got something, bigpodcast.com/contact. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.